This is the Fujifilm GFX100 II, a 102 megapixel medium format camera. I've had this camera for about a month now. I've taken it to a few photo shoots, recently took it on a trip to San Francisco, and I want to talk about my top 5 favorite things about this camera, but also talk about some of the things that I don't like about this camera. Now, Fujifilm did send this camera out for me to test out. However, this is not a sponsored video. They're not paying me to create anything with the camera, and they have no say in the making of this video. And that's mostly because they don't even know that I'm making this video. So right off the bat, the first thing that I like about it is its 102 megapixel medium format sensor. The medium format sensor is what makes this camera so special because it's so much larger than a full frame sensor. About 1.7 times larger than full frame and 4 times bigger than APS-C. This bigger sensor allows for more capture of light. It gives you more dynamic range, more bit depth, a shallower depth of field, a higher resolution image, and so much more. And let me just say that the photos coming out of this 102 megapixel sensor are absolutely unreal, just so incredibly sharp even after cropping in significantly. Now, I recently took this camera on a portrait shoot with my friend Gian, which if you want to watch behind the scenes is also on the channel, but the level of detail this sensor can capture is just amazing. So much detail that I can actually go in and skin retouch and be able to work with all of that skin texture. Number 2, bit depth. The GFX100 II can shoot up to 16-bit uncompressed RAW. Now, 16-bit is nothing to play around with. Most cameras out there, like my A7 IV, can only shoot 14-bit uncompressed, and the difference is huge. 4 trillion colors with 14-bit and 281 trillion colors with 16-bit. Now, looking at the back of the LCD or through the viewfinder, you're really not going to see the difference between 14-bit and 16-bit. Where you will see the difference is when you're actually editing these files. You'll notice you'll have a lot more flexibility and you'll be able to push and pull colors a lot more. Now, these files can get pretty big, with one photo averaging about 200 MB, and every 5 photos or so eating up about a gigabyte of space. And I shot about 100 gigabytes of photos until switching over to lossless compress, which is what I would actually recommend shooting in. It's going to give you the exact same quality, but cut the file sizes down by about 1/3. Number 3, the electronic viewfinder. The viewfinder on the GFX100 II is rated at 9.44 million dots, which is about 3 times higher than my A7 IV. Now, I've never really used the viewfinder on any of the cameras I've owned because, well, I wear glasses and I can't really see the entire viewfinder, and sometimes I mess up the composition. So the only time I really use it is when I lift up my glasses, and that's not that often. But with the GFX, I probably did that about 80% of the time, just because you see so much more detail and color, almost like you're looking at it with your naked eye. Now, this viewfinder actually has a little hidden trick up its sleeve, and that's that you can actually remove it. The viewfinder is completely removable, which actually comes in handy because maybe you can't fit the camera into your camera bag because it is pretty bulky with the viewfinder on, or maybe you're just a type of person that doesn't use the viewfinder, so you want a cleaner look. Now, because we're talking about its viewfinder, let's talk about its LCD screen. Now, this LCD is a tilt LCD. It doesn't flip, so you can use it in landscape mode. You can also use it in portrait mode. But what is crazy is the refresh rate and smoothness of this LCD. I don't know what Fuji is doing with their LCD screens, but it's so responsive, and I haven't experienced anything this smooth from any other brand on the market. Now, these are just some of my favorite features or favorite things about this camera that I've experienced in the 1 month that I've been shooting with it. But there's so many more. Like, for example, it can shoot 400 megapixel photos using its pixel shift mode by merging multiple photos together. It has great ergonomics. It feels good in my hands. When it comes to video, it can shoot up to 8K 30. It can record ProRes RAW via an external recorder. Has a full-size HDMI port. It even has an Ethernet port to connect to things like frame IO for fast file transfers. It has dual card slots. It has 8 stops of in-body image stabilization, which is actually matched to the Sony a7R5 and probably the highest rated IBIS I've ever seen. It has waveforms and vector scopes built right into the camera and has a pretty good high ISO performance despite all of those pixels. And this is mostly because those pixels are spread out across a larger sensor. And because of it being medium format, you actually get a shallower depth of field with the majority of lenses when compared to full frame. It's also weather sealed. It has Fuji's newest Rela Ace film simulation, which also looks really good and true to life. Now, not everything can be gravy, so here are some things I didn't like about this camera during my time with it. Some of these things aren't even specific to the camera, just medium format in general, with the first being its autofocusing system. Now, I talked about Fuji's autofocusing system in the past and is definitely getting better. However, it still can't quite compete with Sony's or Canon's. Now, I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but I was running into an issue where if I had my autofocusing set to human and I wanted to take a picture of my subject, autofocus would lock on fine, but if anyone entered the frame on the side or in the background, it would just lock onto them, which then I thought if I set it to spot focus and move my spot over my subject, it would override the subject detection, but it didn't. So I had to go into my settings and turn off subject detection and stick with spot focus the majority of the time. Now, this didn't happen all the time, but when it did, it was pretty frustrating and did slow down my workflow. Which brings me to my second point, and that's that this camera is slow and not how you'd think. Yeah, it does shoot at a maximum of 8 frames per second burst, so it's definitely not made for those sports and wildlife photographers, but the 8 frames per second makes sense because of how much it's actually reading from that 102 megapixel medium format sensor and how much it's actually writing at the same time. What's actually slow is the entire shooting experience. There were so many times where I turned on the camera and had to wait 3 to 7 seconds just for it to boot up. Then another couple seconds for me to adjust any camera settings. I was shooting on a fast CF Express Type B card, so I wasn't really sure what the issue actually was. But with this and its slower autofocusing, that's when I realized it's a much slower camera, and maybe slow intentionally. I actually embraced this and liked how slow it was in my time shooting with it because it meant I wasn't shooting 200 MB photos on burst and just burning through storage. Number 3, this camera, or medium format cameras in general, are pretty big and heavy, along with their lenses. Now, again, if you're someone who wants medium format, this is expected because the body has to house that much larger sensor and the lenses have to cover that much larger sensor. But for me personally, coming from, full frame and the APS-C with the FX30, I'm not a big fan of the size, extra weight, and especially the space it takes up in my camera bag. And lastly, I could talk about price because, yeah, this is $10,000 Canadian, but I'm not gonna throw it in as a con because this is just the price you pay for medium format. It's not APS-C or full frame. The sensors are a lot harder to produce. You do get a lot of more premium features you don't find in other cameras, and the image quality is just unmatched compared to a lot of these full frame and APS-C cameras. But with that being said, let me know if you have any questions or things you want to know about the GFX. If you found this video helpful, make sure to leave a like. It really does help the channel grow. Hit that subscribe button to see more photography content, and I'll see you in the next one.